6:23 in the morning. That's when my world exploded. The pool pump clicked on like it had every day for 3 months. Same metallic hum, same gentle gurgle of water finding its way through the filtration system. Nothing different, nothing wrong, except for the blonde woman who shot out of my neighbor's bushes like a jack-in-the-box from hell. "Gotcha!" Karen Dubois shrieked, waving some kind of electronic device above her head. Behind her, a thin man in a county jacket emerged from behind my fence line, clipboard already in hand. "I'm Tom Riley, 58 years old, 22 years. Army Special Forces before an IED in Afghanistan turned my left leg into a daily reminder of mortality. And if you're watching Karenology, you know these situations never start small." The device in Karen's hand beeped frantically. She thrust it toward my pool equipment like she was conducting some kind of scientific experiment. 5 decibels over the municipal noise ordinance," she announced to the inspector. "I told you he was violating the peace." The inspector, his badge read R. Walker, stepped forward with a kind of smile that told me my morning was about to get expensive. "Sir, I'm Rick Walker, County Noise Compliance Officer. We've received multiple complaints about excessive noise from your property during restricted hours." I looked at my watch. 6:23. The restricted hours ended at 7. "It's 37 minutes early," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "And it's a pool pump. They're designed to be quiet." Karen's laugh could have stripped paint. "Quiet? That thing sounds like a freight train. Ask anyone in the neighborhood." She gestured broadly, but I noticed the neighborhood was empty. 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. Most people were still in bed or getting ready for work. The only witnesses were Karen, Inspector Walker, and whatever was left of my patients. The inspector scribbled something on his clipboard. "The ordinance is clear. No motorized equipment before 7 a.m. I'm citing you for a noise violation." He tore off a carbon copy and handed it to me. $750. My hand shook slightly as I read it, not from fear, from rage. "There's got to be some kind of medical exemption," I said. "I need the water filtered for my physical therapy. Doctor's orders." Karen pulled out her phone and started recording. Oh, here we go. The sob story routine. "Ma'am, please," I started, but she cut me off. "No, everyone needs to see this. This is how we deal with selfish neighbors who think rules don't apply to them." She held the phone at arm's length, speaking into it like some kind of morning news reporter. "This is what we're dealing with, people. Mr. Military here thinks his problems are more important than everyone else's sleep." The inspector was still writing. "You'll need to install sound dampening equipment if you want to operate before 7. Estimated cost is about $4,000 plus installation." $4,000 on top of the $750 fine. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And if I don't?" "Then you can't run the equipment during restricted hours. Next violation will be $1,500 plus possible confiscation of the equipment." Karen was practically bouncing on her toes. "Finally, someone who enforces the rules around here." I looked at the yellow citation in my hand, at Karen's triumphant face, at the inspector, who was already heading back to his county vehicle. The military dog tag around my neck, my buddy Martinez's tag, the one I'd worn since that day in Kandahar, felt heavier than usual. Martinez always said that when someone comes at you with paperwork instead of bullets, you know you're dealing with a different kind of war. Standing in my backyard in my pajamas, holding a citation that could cost me more than my monthly disability check, I realized Martinez had been right about that too. Karen was still filming, still talking to her phone about property values and inconsiderate neighbors. The inspector's car door slammed shut with the finality of a prison cell. And somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard the sound of battle drums starting to beat. The pool pump shut off automatically at 7. Silence fell over my backyard like a blanket, but the damage was done. By 8 a.m., Karen had uploaded her video to Facebook. By 9, it had 37 shares and a comment thread that made my stomach turn. Entitled Veteran thinks he's special. Some people never learn respect. Why doesn't he just move to the country? I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the citation and a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The phone rang. "Tom, you see what's happening online?" It was Joe Castillo, my neighbor from 3 houses down. Mechanic, good guy, usually minded his own business. I'm trying not to look. She's got a whole Facebook group now. Quiet mornings in Oakland Hills. 67 people already joined. They're talking about petitioning the city council. I rub my forehead. Joe, I need that pump running early. The warm water helps with the leg before I do my exercises. Dr. Reeves said it's the best thing for keeping the mobility I've got left. Silence on the other end, then. Tom, I gotta tell you something. I might have signed one of her petitions last week. My stomach dropped. What petition? She came around with some paper about noise complaints. Said it was just to document problems for the homeowners association. I didn't know it was about you specifically. Another ally gone before the war even started. Joe, look, I'm sorry, man, if I'd known, but maybe you could just run the pump later, after 7. As I hung up without answering. The doorbell rang at 10:15. Through the peephole, I saw a young guy in a polo shirt holding a tablet. When I opened the door, he smiled the kind of smile that said he was about to ruin my day further. Mr. Riley, I'm Brad from Westside Pool Service. Karen Dubois said you might need a sound dampening system installed. Of course she did. How much? I asked, though I already knew I couldn't afford it. For a full acoustic enclosure that'll meet county standards, we're looking at $4,200 for materials, plus $800 for installation. But I could do it for $4,000 even, cash deal. $4,000 I didn't have for a system to muffle equipment that wasn't actually loud in the first place. I thanked Brad and closed the door. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store for some basic groceries. The cashier, a kid I'd seen a dozen times before, wouldn't make eye contact. When I handed him my card, he practically threw the receipt at me. Have a day, he mumbled, turning to help the next customer before I'd even picked up my bag. Outside, I saw why. Karen was standing by the customer service counter, talking animatedly to the store manager. She pointed in my direction, and both of them stared. The manager nodded seriously and made a note on whatever paper she was holding. I loaded my groceries and drove to the one place in town where I knew I could think clearly. The brass bucket hadn't changed in 20 years. Same wooden bar, same neon beer signs, same smell of old cigarettes and broken dreams. Frank Kowalski had been tending bar here since before I shipped out to Afghanistan. Vietnam vet himself, understood the weight that some conversations carried. Heard you're having some trouble, Frank said, sliding a beer across the bar without being asked. Bad news travels fast. Karen Dubois was in here yesterday. Loud talker, that one. Kept going on about property values and inconsiderate neighbors. I took a long drink. She's got half the neighborhood convinced I'm some kind of monster. Frank wiped down a glass, considering his words. Thing is, Tom, she wasn't alone. Had her sister with her. Identical twin, near as I could tell. Kelly, I think her name was. Sister? Yeah, they were planning something, those two. Talking about how they'd already gotten 3 families to move out of Kelly's neighborhood over in Riverside. Same kind of tactics, noise complaints, social media campaigns, making people's lives miserable until they gave up and left. I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't about my pool pump at all. They've done this before? Multiple times, from what I heard. And that inspector, Rick Walker, he was supposed to meet them here later. Something about splitting proceeds from successful complaints. Frank leaned closer, lowering his voice. Tom, I think you stumbled into something bigger than a noise ordinance. I stared at my reflection in the bar mirror. The face looking back was older than I remembered, more tired. But underneath the fatigue, something else was stirring. Something I hadn't felt since Martinez and I used to plan night raids in the mountains of Afghanistan. The tag around my neck felt warm against my chest. Frank, you got a back room where we could talk private? He nodded toward a door marked Employees Only. And Frank, next time those 3 come in together, maybe keep your ears open. His grin was sharp as broken glass. Way ahead of you, soldier. Frank's back room smelled like cardboard and old beer. He pulled out a folding chair and gestured for me to sit while he leaned against a stack of liquor boxes. Here's what I overheard, he said, keeping his voice low. Karen and her sister have been working neighborhoods for 2 years. They target houses with pools, home workshops, anything that makes noise. File complaints, get the owners hit with fines, then either offer to buy the properties cheap or help friends flip them. I felt the pieces clicking together like weapon parts in the dark. And Inspector Walker gets $500 cash for every citation that sticks. They split the fine money 3 ways when people pay up instead of fighting. Jesus! I rubbed Martinez's tag between my fingers, thinking, how many families? Karen mentioned 7 in Riverside. All moved within 6 months of her targeting them. Properties sold 20 to 30% below market value. This wasn't harassment. This was organized theft with government paperwork. Frank, I need you to do something for me. Next time they meet here, can you record the conversation? He pulled out his phone and showed me a recording app. Already thought of that. But Tom, you gotta know, fighting this thing could get ugly. These people have connections. Walker's got friends in the county office. I stood up, decision made. Then I guess we better get uglier than they are. That evening, I called Dr. Reeves and asked him to document my medical need for early morning hydrotherapy. 20 minutes later, I had an official letter on hospital letterhead stating that morning pool therapy was medically necessary for maintaining mobility and preventing chronic pain episodes. Armed with the letter, I drove to Inspector Walker's office the next morning. The county building was one of those 70s concrete blocks that looked like it was designed to crush people's hopes. Walker's cubicle was on the 3rd floor, wedged between property assessment and septic permits. Mr. Riley, he said without looking up from his computer, here to pay your fine? Here to request a medical exemption. I slid Dr. Reeves' letter across his desk. He barely glanced at it. Medical exemptions require notarized documentation, 3 forms of verification, and approval from the county health board. Takes about 6 weeks, assuming it gets approved at all. 6 weeks? Could be longer. We're pretty backed up. He finally looked at me, and his smile had all the warmth of a snake. Of course, you could just pay the fine and install the sound dampening. Problem solved. I kept my voice steady. And if I don't? Well, we'll have to do another inspection soon, and if you're still in violation, he shrugged. Fines double every time. Walking back to my truck, I felt the familiar weight of being outgunned, but Martinez always said that when you're outgunned, you change the battlefield. That afternoon, I drove to Riverside. Karen's sister lived in a neighborhood that looked like it had been hit by a plague. 3 houses with for sale signs, 2 more sitting empty with overgrown lawns. I parked across from a Spanish-style house where a middle-aged woman was loading boxes into a moving truck. "Excuse me," I called out. "You moving?" She looked up, and I saw exhaustion in her eyes that I recognized. Battle fatigue. "Yeah, finally giving up." "Mind if I ask why?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Noise complaints. Some woman named Kelly kept calling the county about my husband's workshop. He builds furniture as a hobby, but apparently that makes us inconsiderate neighbors who don't respect the community. "How much in fines?" $3,200, plus they wanted us to install soundproofing that would cost more than our car. She threw another box into the truck. "Easier to just leave." I gave her my card. "If you ever want to talk about what happened, call me. There might be others dealing with the same thing." She pocketed the card without looking at it, but I caught something in her expression, a flicker of interest. That night, I sat in my living room with a legal pad and started making lists. Karen's targets, Walker's inspection schedule, the timeline of complaints and fines. Pattern recognition was something the Army had beaten into my skull, and patterns were starting to emerge. They always started with morning noise complaints, always used the same decibel meter, always offered the same contractor for soundproofing solutions, and always, the properties ended up sold within 6 months. My phone buzzed, text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or next citation will be worse." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. Threats meant I was getting close to something they wanted to protect. I walked out to my backyard and looked at the pool pump. Tomorrow morning at 6:23 it would kick on again. Same time, same routine. But this time, I'd be ready for whatever came out of those bushes. Martinez's tag caught the moonlight as I headed inside. Some battles, he used to say, you don't choose, they choose you. This one had definitely chosen me. 6:23 a.m. came like clockwork, but this time, I was waiting. I'd positioned myself at the kitchen window with a clear view of the backyard. The pump kicked on with its familiar hum, and sure enough, Karen emerged from behind Joe's fence line. But today, she wasn't alone. 2 women, identical blonde hair, identical aggressive posture, identical clipboards. The Dubois sisters in action. And they brought friends. Inspector Walker appeared from the side yard, but he had company, another county official I didn't recognize, plus what looked like a building inspector, 4 against 1, all with official badges and the power to make my life miserable. I grabbed my phone and started recording through the window. "Mr. Riley," Walker called out. "County inspection. Please come outside." I took my time getting to the back door. Let them wait. Let them wonder if I was going to cooperate or if this was going to get complicated. Gentlemen, ladies, I stepped onto my patio, phone still recording, little early for a social call. Karen, or maybe it was Kelly, I couldn't tell them apart, stepped forward with her decibel reader. Follow-up noise inspection, and this time we have witnesses. The second sister pulled out her own phone and started filming. For documentation purposes. Walker consulted his clipboard. "Mr. Riley, this is Building Inspector Davis and Code Enforcement Officer Martinez." The irony of that name wasn't lost on me. "We've received additional complaints about potential building code violations related to your pool equipment installation." Davis stepped forward, a thin man with the kind of mustache that screamed petty authority. "Permit records show this pump system was installed 3 years ago. We need to verify it meets current electrical and noise abatement standards." "It was inspected when it was installed," I said. "Standards change," Martinez, the living ones, replied. "Current code requires sound dampening for any motorized pool equipment within 50 feet of property lines." I looked around my yard. My neighbors' houses were at least 60 feet away on all sides. 50 feet, I repeated. "As of last month," Davis confirmed, making notes. "Retroactive compliance required within 30 days of notification." Of course it was retroactive. Of course it was. Karen, I was pretty sure this was the original Karen, held up her decibel reader like it was evidence in a murder trial. 7.2 decibels over the morning noise limit, same as yesterday. "Actually," I said, pulling out my own phone, "I bought one of those meters myself yesterday, curious what the readings would show." I held up a device identical to theirs. The numbers on my screen showed the pump running at 52 decibels, well within the legal limit of 55. The sisters exchanged glances. "Your device must be malfunctioned," one of them said quickly. "Must be," I agreed. "Good thing I bought 2 different models, just to be sure." I pulled out a second meter, same reading, 52 decibels. Walker cleared his throat. "Regardless of noise levels, the building code violation stands. You have 30 days to install sound dampening or face daily fines of $200. $200 a day for 30 days. That was $6,000 on top of the sound dampening costs. And if the sound dampening doesn't meet your standards after installation?" Davis smiled. "Then we'll need to reassess. Could take several inspections to get it right. Each inspection, no doubt, with its own fee." I looked at the 4 of them standing in my backyard, official badges gleaming in the morning sun, clipboards full of violations and fines and retroactive regulations designed to bleed me dry. Have you ever felt the exact moment when you realize someone's not just trying to inconvenience you, they're trying to destroy you? "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, slipping both decibel meters into my pocket. "I'll need some time to review these new requirements." 30 days, Walker reminded me, starting now. They filed out of my backyard like a parade of bureaucratic vultures. I watched from the window as they gathered on the sidewalk for what looked like a victory celebration, handshakes all around. Karen, definitely the original Karen, pulled out her phone again, probably updating her Facebook group about the successful morning raid. Then something interesting happened. Walker pulled out an envelope and handed it to one of the sisters. She opened it, counted what looked like cash, and passed half to her twin. Walker got his own envelope from Davis. Payment for services rendered. My phone had been recording the entire time. That afternoon, I drove back to the Brass Bucket. Frank was expecting me. "Got something for you," he said, sliding a flash drive across the bar. "From last night. The 3 of them were here for about 2 hours, planning this morning's show." "What's on it?" "Everything. The sister, Kelly, bragging about how they've cleared 7 families out of Riverside using the same building code trick. Walker talking about splitting fine money 3 ways. And the best part? Frank leaned closer. "They're planning to expand the operation, target the whole neighborhood, 1 house at a time. Yours was just the test run." I plugged the flash drive into my phone and listened to 30 seconds of audio. Clear voices, clear admissions, clear evidence of conspiracy to defraud. But as I sat there listening to them plan my destruction, one thing became crystal clear. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Martinez's tag felt warm against my chest as I pocketed the flash drive and stood up to leave. Time to change the battlefield. The next morning, I didn't run the pool pump. Instead, I sat on my back patio at 6 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, waiting. By 6:30, Karen appeared at her usual spot behind Joe's fence. Decibel meter ready. She waited and waited. No pump, no violation, no payday. At 6:45, she made a phone call. Angry gestures, lots of pointing at my house. By 7 a.m., she'd given up and stormed back inside. I gave it 3 days. 3 days of silence from my backyard. 3 days of Karen lurking in bushes with nothing to cite me for. On the fourth morning, I fired up the pump at exactly 7 a.m., perfectly legal. She appeared anyway, meter in hand, practically sprinting across the yard. "Mr. Riley, County Noise Inspection." I walked outside, phone recording. "Morning, Karen. Little late today, aren't you?" "The equipment is still too loud. I'm documenting ongoing violations." She held up her meter. It showed 58 decibels, 3 over the legal limit. I held up mine, 51 decibels. "It's funny how these things can be so different," I said. That's when I noticed her meter had a piece of black tape over the model number. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in on her device. "Karen, can you show me the calibration certificate for that meter?" "The what?" County Regulation 47B requires all noise monitoring equipment to be calibrated monthly by a certified technician. Should have a sticker with the date. She looked at her device like it had betrayed her. No sticker, no certification, no legal standing for any of her readings. This is a professional grade meter." "I'm sure it is, but without calibration, it's just an expensive toy. Any citations based on uncalibrated equipment get thrown out automatically." Her face went through several interesting color changes before she turned and marched away. That afternoon, Walker showed up alone. "Mr. Riley, we need to discuss your compliance timeline." "Actually, Rick, can I call you Rick? We need to discuss your calibration protocols." I handed him a printed copy of County Regulation 47B, highlighted in yellow. Turns out all those noise violations from uncalibrated equipment, invalid, which means all the fines based on those violations, also invalid. He read the regulation twice, and I watched his commission checks disappearing behind his eyes. "The building code violations still stand," he said finally. "Absolutely, which is why I contacted the county engineering department yesterday, had them send out a certified surveyor to measure the exact distances from my equipment to all property lines." I handed him the surveyor's report. Minimum distance to any property line, 62 feet. Current code requirement, 50 feet. Looks like I'm in compliance after all. Walker studied the report like he was trying to find a typo that would save his scheme. This could be a mistake. We might need to resurvey." "Feel free, but you'll need to use a different surveyor. County Regulation 23A says any property dispute requires an independent third-party measurement. I'd spent the last 3 days reading every county regulation that touched on property inspections, noise ordinances, and building codes. Amazing what you can learn when your livelihood depends on it." Walker left without saying another word. But that evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Riley, this is Susan Walker." I almost hung up, thinking it was some kind of setup. Then she continued, "I'm Rick's wife, and I think we need to talk." We met at a coffee shop downtown, far from the brass bucket and far from prying eyes. Susan Walker was nothing like what I'd expected. Mid-40s, tired eyes, the look of someone carrying a heavy secret. "My husband doesn't know I'm here," she said, stirring her coffee without drinking it. "But I found something in his home office that I think you should see." She slid a manila folder across the table. "Bank deposit records. For the last 18 months. Every deposit matches up with the dates he issued citations in your neighborhood and over in Riverside." I opened the folder. Page after page of deposits. 500 here, 500 there, sometimes 1,000. Always cash. always the day after inspection reports were filed. "Susan, why are you showing me this?" She looked out the window, watching traffic pass. "Because I used to be proud of my husband's work. Thought he was making neighborhoods better, keeping property values up. Then I started noticing patterns." "What kind of patterns?" "The complaints always came from the same two women. The violations always required expensive fixes from the same contractors, and the properties always got sold within months." She turned back to me, and I saw something in her expression I recognized from my own mirror, the look of someone who'd discovered they were living with a stranger. "How many families has he done this to?" 12 that I can count, maybe more. 12 families driven from their homes by manufactured violations and impossible fines. 12 families who lost their savings, their equity, their peace of mind. "Oh, Lawson, are you willing to testify about what you found?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "My husband forgot who he married. I didn't spend 20 years as a county clerk to watch him turn into a con artist." Walking back to my truck, I felt something shifting in my chest. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't playing defense. Martinez's tag caught the streetlight as I reached for my keys. "Time to go on the offensive, brother," I whispered. But first, I had one more stop to make. Joe Castillo answered his door in coveralls, grease under his fingernails, the smell of motor oil following him like cologne. He looked surprised to see me. "Tom, hey, look, about that petition thing." "Joe, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." He stepped back, letting me into his garage. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboard walls, and a classic Mustang sat half-assembled in the center bay. "When Karen came around with that petition, what exactly did she tell you?" Joe wiped his hands on a shop rag, not meeting my eyes. "She said there had been noise complaints from multiple neighbors, said the homeowners association was documenting problems for legal action." "Legal action against who?" She didn't say specifically, just that property values were being affected by inconsiderate neighbors who didn't follow community standards. I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos from Susan Walker's folder, a bank deposit receipt dated the day after Joe signed the petition. "Joe, that petition wasn't for the homeowners association. It was evidence for a county inspector who gets paid $500 every time he writes a citation." The color drained from Joe's face as he stared at the receipt. Jesus Christ, Tom, I had no idea." "I know you didn't, but here's the thing. They're not done. Karen and her sister are planning to work through the whole neighborhood, house by house. Anyone with a workshop, a pool, a dog that barks, anything that makes noise." Joe sat down heavily on a workbench. "My air compressor. I run it most mornings around 6:30. "Exactly. And my welding setup. The exhaust fan is probably louder than your pool pump. They'll get to you eventually, probably within the month, once they're done with me." Joe looked around his garage like he was seeing it for the first time. 20 years of building this space, collecting tools, restoring cars. His sanctuary. "What do we do?" That was the question I'd been hoping for. "We stop playing defense and start playing offense. But I need to know, are you willing to take some risks?" Joe stood up, and I saw something in his expression that reminded me of the guys I used to serve with. The moment when someone stops being a bystander and becomes a soldier. "What kind of risks?" 3 hours later, we had a plan. The next morning, Joe fired up his air compressor at 6:25 a.m. Right on schedule, Karen appeared with her trusty decibel meter and her phone, ready to document another violation. But this time, she had an audience. Frank from the Brass Bucket stood at the edge of Joe's property with a professional-grade video camera. Susan Walker sat in her car across the street, documenting everything on her own phone, and I was positioned on my back patio with a clear view of the entire show. Karen held up her meter and announced to her phone, "Another inconsiderate neighbor. Look at these readings." Her meter showed 61 decibels. Joe's certified meter, the one he'd borrowed from a buddy at the county engineering department, showed 52. "Ma'am," Joe called out politely, "could you show me the calibration certificate for that device?" Karen's performance stumbled. "The what?" "County regulation at 47B. All noise monitoring equipment needs monthly calibration. Should have a sticker." She looked at her meter, then at the growing audience, then back at her meter. "I don't need to show you anything." But Frank's camera was rolling, Susan was taking notes, and Karen's own Facebook live stream was broadcasting her admission that she didn't have proper calibration documentation. 23 people were watching live. Comments started rolling in. Wait, she's been using uncalibrated equipment? Doesn't that invalidate all her complaints? Someone should report this to the county. Karen ended the live stream abruptly and stalked back toward her house. But Joe wasn't done. Ma'am, one more question. How many other neighbors have you cited with that uncalibrated meter? She spun around, and for a moment, I thought she might actually charge at him. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made a call. Rick, we have a problem. From my patio, I could hear Walker's voice through her phone. Angry, worried, and getting louder. 20 minutes later, Walker's county vehicle pulled up. But this time, he wasn't alone. A woman in a business suit got out of the passenger side, badge hanging from her belt, serious expression, the kind of authority that made even other authority figures nervous. Internal affairs. Susan had made her own phone call that morning. I watched from my window as the IA investigator interviewed Karen, then Walker, then both sisters together. Lots of pointing, lots of raised voices, lots of nervous glances toward the houses where their victims lived. My phone buzzed, text from Susan Walker. They're asking for all documentation of inspections and violations for the last 2 years. Rick's in serious trouble. I looked out at my pool pump, humming quietly in the morning sun. At Joe's air compressor, running exactly as loud as it was supposed to. At Karen's house, where the blinds were drawn tight against the light. Martinez's tag caught the morning sun as I stepped outside. The battlefield had definitely changed. But the war wasn't over yet. 3 weeks later, the Oakland Hills Community Center was packed tighter than a Sunday service. The monthly city council meeting had drawn the biggest crowd in years, and everyone knew why. I sat in the third row, Susan Walker to my left, Frank from the brass bucket to my right. Joe had saved seats for the 7 families from Riverside who'd driven over to watch justice finally get served. The woman who'd been loading boxes into her moving truck, Maria Santos, sat directly behind me. She'd decided not to sell her house after all. At the front table, Mayor Richardson shuffled papers and tried to look like he was in control of a situation that had already spiraled far beyond anyone's expectations. Before we begin tonight's proceedings, he announced, I want to address the investigation that's been dominating local news. The room went dead quiet. County Inspector Rick Walker has been terminated from his position effective immediately. The district attorney's office has filed charges including conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and abuse of public office. Applause rippled through the crowd. Maria Santos squeezed my shoulder. Additionally, the county will be refunding all fines paid based on citations issued by Mr. Walker over the past 2 years. That's 43 families and approximately $67,000 in improper penalties. The applause got louder. Someone whooped from the back row. But I wasn't done yet. I stood up when the mayor called for public comments. Tom Riley, Oakland Hills resident, I said, walking to the podium. 3 weeks ago, I was facing $6,000 in fines for running a pool pump that helps me deal with combat injuries. Tonight, I want to talk about accountability. I pulled out the flash drive Frank had given me and held it up. This contains audio recordings of the people responsible for this scheme, discussing their plan to systematically target and harass families until they sold their homes at below-market prices. What we discovered wasn't just corruption. It was organized theft, disguised as code enforcement. The room was absolutely silent now. Walker couldn't have done this alone. He needed co-conspirators, people who filed false complaints, used uncalibrated equipment to generate fake evidence, and collected payment for their services. I looked directly at the back of the room, where Karen and Kelly Dubois sat in folding chairs, trying to become invisible. The question is, what happens to them? Mayor Richardson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Riley, the county investigation is ongoing. With respect, Mayor Richardson, the county investigation is focused on their employee. I'm talking about citizens who knowingly participated in fraudulent activities that cost their neighbors thousands of dollars and forced families from their homes. Maria Santos stood up, then Joe, then Frank. One by one, every person who'd been targeted by the scheme rose to their feet. These people, I continued, gesturing to the standing crowd, lost their savings, their peace of mind, and their faith in their community because a small group of individuals decided to profit from manufactured misery. I pulled Martinez's tag from under my shirt and held it in my palm. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing in the face of organized evil. It spreads, it grows, it destroys everything decent people have built. The tag caught the fluorescent lights as I closed my fist around it. So here's what's going to happen. The Dubois sisters are going to publicly apologize to every family they helped target. They're going to pay restitution for the emotional distress and financial losses they caused. And they're going to face whatever criminal charges the DA's office deems appropriate. Karen Dubois shot to her feet. You can't prove anything. I smiled and held up Frank's flash drive again. Actually, Karen, I can prove everything. Your voice, your sister's voice, Walker's voice, all recorded planning this operation. The DA already has copies. Her face went through the same color changes I'd seen in my backyard 3 weeks ago, but this time she had nowhere to run. The choice, I continued, turning back to the crowd, is between justice and revenge. Justice means accountability, restitution, and consequences. Revenge means making their lives as miserable as they made ours. I looked directly at Karen and Kelly. Ladies, I'm recommending justice, but if you fight this, if you try to weasel out of taking responsibility for what you've done, then we'll see how you like being the target instead of the predator. The vote was unanimous. Full investigation, criminal referrals, and a new county oversight committee to prevent future abuse. As people filed out of the community center, Joe caught up with me in the parking lot. Think they'll actually face charges? Walker definitely will. The sisters, I shrugged. Depends how good their lawyer is, but their reputations in this town are finished either way. And your pool pump? I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in months. Runs every morning at 6:23, just like clockwork. Nobody's complained lately. Joe grinned and headed toward his truck. See you around, Tom. And hey, if you ever need backup again, you know where to find me. I stood alone in the parking lot, watching the last few cars pull away. The community center lights went dark, and quiet settled over Oakland Hills like a blanket. My phone buzzed, text from Susan Walker. Rick got 15 months federal prison. Thank you for giving me the courage to do the right thing. I typed back, thank you for choosing your community over your husband's crimes. Driving home, I thought about the families who'd been forced to sell their houses, the savings accounts drained by fraudulent fines, the stress and sleepless nights caused by people who'd turned harassment into a business model. Some of that damage couldn't be undone. Maria Santos got her house back, but others had already moved on, started over somewhere else, rebuilt lives that never should have been disrupted. The real victory wasn't exposing the corruption. It was what came after. Neighbors who'd been isolated and targeted had found each other. A community that had been fractured by fear and suspicion had come together to fight back. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Tomorrow morning at 6:23, my pool pump would kick on. The water would circulate, the filter would clean out debris, and I'd do my exercises in warm, therapeutic water that helped keep my damaged leg functional. Simple routine, normal life, the kind of peace that Martinez and I used to dream about during those long nights in Afghanistan. I touched his tag one more time before heading inside. Mission accomplished, brother, I whispered. Justice served, and the good guys won. The pool pump hummed quietly in the darkness, and for the first time in weeks, it sounded like music.